Hello, builders. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening to this podcast. Whenever you're listening to this podcast, we're glad to have you. If you're a returning guest, thanks for coming back and listening to the show. If you're new to the show, hey, welcome aboard. We want to build you so you can build others. We do that through our training, our coaching, and our speaking events. And we also do that with some special guests we have here on the podcast. I'm grateful today to have Raj Nathan on the podcast. Raj believes everyone has a voice. He's the founder of Startup Hyperman, and the reason he's on this earth is to help others find their voice. We're going to talk about that a little later in the podcast. The best way he's been able to do that is through storytelling in various forms. He's an entrepreneur helping companies get their own story straight. So welcome to the podcast today, Raj.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. And I appreciate you having me on.
That's great. Well, I'm going to start this podcast off the way we start all of our podcasts off. We're going to ask you, what does leadership and being a leader mean to Raj Nathan?
Okay. And that's actually a really good way to start off every show, because I'm sure you get a lot of diverse answers with that. When I think about this, I think what first comes to mind is this idea of being able to advocate for the wants and the needs of a community. Now, community you can take to mean multiple things. Like community can mean like the company that you're leading. Community could mean like an advocacy group. Community can mean like your neighborhood, right? It can take on multiple forms. And I'm talking about a congregation, quote unquote, of people who are all, working towards a common interest of some kind. And so to be a leader and to have leadership skills means you are able to effectively serve this community by advocating on their behalf and almost acting as a way to like centralize the wants and the needs of this community to be able to provide some guidance and direction. And I think this notion of like, it's kind of ironic because like blockchain has become so popular now, and this idea of decentralized in a different sense has become very popular. But I think when it comes to like the concept of leadership, there has to be some notion of like centralized, a centralized control center almost. And I don't want that to come across as in like the wrong way that we're talking about, like, stripping control away from others. I just mean in order to be effective, you have to have like one commander, one control center, or multiple control centers that are able to take in all the various needs, distill it down, and say, okay, well, this is who we are, this is what we represent, and this is what we're going for. Without that in place, you can have a community of people, but it's a bunch of different voices and no clear, for anyone who's supposed to be listening to that, there's no clear understanding of who am I supposed to be listening to, or what opinion is supposed to be the one that we latch on to work towards, right? So I really, it's almost like the idea of like a tribe, where a tribe, I think, in at least my understanding, is it's a little bit different than a community in the sense that a tribe has a designated chief, right? A tribe has a designated leader. And that's how you have to look at leadership here. Is it's like you're carrying this. I kept using the word community, but the more I talk through it, it's like you're representing this tribe, and it's your job to advocate for them. It's your job to even help them figure out what they should be advocating for themselves. And ultimately, I think all of this, I'd be remiss if I didn't use the word service here, right? As a leader, you are in service to this community, to this tribe.
That is a great answer, Raj. And as you alluded to, we get a lot of diverse answers for this question. And this is the first time I've heard community brought up in it. And I hear a lot of heart leadership, a lot of servant leadership, but this community, and you talking about how you're representing that community, makes me think of the heart leadership. It makes me think of someone's at the center of this, or an idea is at the center of this that's leading people and keeping that around the community and what the community desires, or what the tribe desires. When you get together collectively, there is it takes on a character. It takes on, the community has its own ideas and its own ambitions. And I think as the leader, if you're carrying that community towards that goal, then you're going somewhere.
Yeah, it's right. It's almost like it's being able to guide, and it's being able to navigate on behalf of the people. And that's what I think people look to their leaders for. And you don't necessarily want a leader who's showing up every day and saying, well, let's figure out what's going on today. I don't really have a plan. Let's just figure it out. Let's just talk it out. Right. So it's having that ability to like comb through and collate and distill down what are the core values here, what are the core needs, and let's figure out a roadmap to get there. It doesn't mean the leader is doing all of the things to get there. It means the leader is able to create the roadmap and plan for the people to be able to do what they need to do in order to get to that common vision or goal.
That's a really great answer, and I love the conversation around it. It just leads me to understand that when a leader's leading someone on a journey, they have a destination in mind. It's not just like you alluded to, just showing them, say, okay, let's just have fun today. There's an objective. There's something that we're after, a goal, and typically, if it's an ambitious goal, it's going to take some ambitious efforts to make happen. And a great leader knows how to do that and bring everybody in. So that's awesome.
Well, and on that note, if I can just add one more thing there, Raj. Right? No one really necessarily likes the leader who tries to take on and do everything themselves, right? The person who's bad at delegating is a bad leader. So that's why I think it's even more important to highlight that it's about creating the roadmap, about creating the structure for the community to be able to thrive, but not taking on each individual effort, because otherwise it's then the community is reliant on you as the leader, as opposed to the system you have created or the system that's in place to be able to allow the community to grow.
That's good, Roger. When you said that, I've got a keynote speech that I do called Plan, Purpose, Length, Action, and Negotiate. And part of that is creating what I call a flight plan. And what I think leaders need to learn to do is create the plan, hand it off. And as long as your team members or your community is on course, there's no need for course correction. If they're following the plan that's been set forth, then just give them accolades and say, hey, you're doing a good job. Now, if they're off course, now there's got to be some inputs and some minor adjustments and changes to get back on course. But that's great to hear you say, give them a map. And when you have someone take a map, let them use the map. Give them the freedom and the liberty to use the map.
Well, and with that, one of the things that makes me think of is, whenever I'm working with companies and we're talking about like their communication, right? The first thing I always say, my mantra is think like an entertainer. And the reason I say think like an entertainer is because the entertainer is so think about what an entertainer's goal is. It is to elicit emotional response, elicit an emotional reaction from their audience. And I think similarly, a good leader is looking at how do I make that emotional connection with my stakeholders, whomever they may be. And an entertainer, they have a plan in the sense of, if they're a music artist, they have a set list they go and they play that night. Or the actor has a script that they're reading from, right? And it's not to say you can never go off script or you can't have that awesome guitar solo, but there is no going off script for that great improvisation in the moment. And there is no amazing guitar solo without some set list or without some screenplay, already in place. And I think that speaks to what you're saying with the plan idea is you have like one path that there's this agreed upon path, but it does allow for some deviance based on the situation, knowing that you're still going to be able to ultimately get back to the path.
That's good. Yeah, that's that negotiation part of my plan is at times things are going to change. You got to be willing to negotiate that change. Hey, think of the last year we've been in this COVID-19. There's been a lot of change that's had to happen, and you've had to negotiate your plan. Doesn't change the goal, doesn't change what you're after, but changing the way you go about it and the way you get there. And so I think that's something that definitely people have to think about. You just talked a lot about communication. That leads me to the next point I wanted to talk to you about. You said here that communication, AKA how a CEO should communicate a big new idea, product change to the company or the external market. What are some ideas that help people communicate better and deliver these great ideas, but Speaking of change, a lot of people don't like change. So how do you communicate that and get buy-in?
Yeah. So the work that I do is really centered around how do you pitch anything to anyone at the end of the day, right? How do you pitch, whether it's your product, whether it's your vision, whatever it might be, how do you pitch that to your intended audience? And I think where you see a lot of friction is when you open with, well, here's what I need to see out of you all. Or I think just think of a hypothetical scenario here where a company CEO, for example, is communicating some like directional change to the employees, and they open and they say, here's what I need to see from everyone. Here's what we're doing differently, and here's why you need to. Here's what you need to do. It's probably not going to be received very favorably because it's so deeply rooted in like, what do I as the CEO need? What are my wants and my needs? It doesn't take into account the stakeholders here. And this is where I come back to that notion of think like an entertainer, right? Be audience focused, see and speak from your audience's point of view. And so, in my work, I've worked with CEOs, with founders, with revenue leaders. I've even trained politicians on their messaging strategy in the past for how to get constituents on board with something. And the base formula I always like to share with them is what I call is, okay, well, what's your elevator pitch for this scenario? And I don't want people to hear that and think, okay, well, I'm never in an elevator with especially now, I'm never in an elevator with someone else. And we're certainly not having a conversation. And the idea is not necessarily like if you're in an elevator, it's how are you going to communicate your idea in 60 seconds or less to get people interested to want to learn more? And I think if you apply this formula, I'll share in a second, if you apply it, it not only is that 60-second soundbite, but then it's what you can build the deeper communication off of. It's what you can build your presentation that unveils this new thing your company is doing. So you can build that off of. It's what you can use as the launch pad for like, a debate on the topic if you're a politician, for example. And so the formula we always use as a starting point is what I call the que pasa elevator pitch, which if anyone knows Spanish, they would know that que pasa means what's up or what's happening. And that's kind of what you have to do. You have to like level with your audience, tell them what's up. And what that represents is, so que pasa, PASA is the acronym, and that's problem, approach, solution, action. Problem, approach, solution, action. When you communicate in those terms, effectively what you're doing is providing context and frame of reference for the current landscape and the way things are and whatever challenge has come up. But most importantly, you are leading with empathy. And when you're able to lead with empathy, then the first reaction you're going to generate out of that audience is, this person understands me. They get it. They get what's going on here. And that's going to make them more receptive to listen to your approach and solution, which is the next part of the que pasa formula, where you explain, what you're doing about it, or what your product is, or what your new, vision for the company is, whatever that might be. And then the action is like, okay, is the call to action. What do you want them to do about it, right? So, let's take, for example, let's take an example. Let's say a CEO or a manager is needing to communicate a rebrand, right? The company is rebranding to something else. The wrong way to go about this would be, hey, everyone, here's our new company name. And here's our new company brand. Start using it. The wrong way to go about that would be to say, hey, everyone, I need to see better performance out of the company, so we're doing a rebrand. Start using it. The right way to go about that, if you apply the que pasa elevator pitch formula, is to open by saying, here's all the good things we've done, and here's some of the challenges that have come up with that. And we're seeing that if we keep going down this path, we're going to keep hitting this roadblock. And that's going to be a challenge because we've got these goals and we can't get there if we keep hitting this roadblock. So here's what's going to happen as a result. And here's our new company name. Here's what we represent now. Here's what we want you to be doing, out in the field. Here's how we want you to represent us. And then your call to action would be like, obviously it's like, so get on board with this, but it's like, and if we do this effectively, if you're able to be stewards of this new brand every day effectively, here's where it's going to take us. And so my ask today is simply that you believe, is that you give it a try. Because I promise you, if you give it a try, we're going to go places, and we're going to go the right places.
That is beautiful. And I love the Pasa side of that, because, when that elevator pitch began trending a few years ago, some people overused that elevator pitch. It's like, I don't want to be on an elevator with this person because, I think when you find out, what's up, what's going on, how are you doing, your elevator pitch may not even be practical at that point. Some people don't need the services you provide, and people just and the first thing they meet someone, hey Raj, how you doing? Now here's my elevator pitch. But when you really seek to find out what others need and what their concerns are, and genuinely, authentically ask them, how are you? Now we're starting to build a relationship, and we all know that's how transactions take place, is when people know, like, and trust you. And then the other thing that I thought was really cool is when you start talking about telling the team that you're working with the why. We heard Simon Sinek talk about the why and how important it is. Anytime we have an initiative, I was working with a team this week, and the supervisor manager wanted to place these new requirements on the team. And I said, let's back up and explain why those requirements, what's the purpose of this, so that, and it's back to that plan, purpose, linked action, negotiate. The purpose, people are driven by purpose. And if you just give them the what and the how without the why, you just haven't given them the understanding of, now I understand why we're doing this. And I think that leading with that, as you suggested, is going to be very influential and help others, follow you as the leader. And that's a great encouragement there. Another thing. Go ahead.
They need to be able to buy into something, and they can't buy in unless you've effectively set the terms with them and given them that baseline why, as you said.
Yeah, that lead segues great into the next thing I want to talk to you about here. You said being a leader means having a voice. And so the using this voice in the fashion you've already described, but what are other voices that leaders have, and how do they use those effectively?
Oh, I think anytime a leader steps up anywhere, they have to have a voice or use their voice. So there is having the voice in front of your internal team. There's having the voice in front of the external, if it's a company we're talking about, in front of your customers, in front of third-party stakeholders, in front of investors, for example, right? These are all examples where your voice shows up. And, one of the big things that I'll work with companies on when we figure out what their messaging and what their overall pitch should be is we look at okay, hey, CEO, what's your vision? What is your vision for not only this company, but what the industry is supposed to look like? And what the industry is capable of becoming. Because if we understand that, and a lot of times they have it somewhere in their head, they just have never really articulated it in a way that, other people would have heard of before. Or what I'll get usually is, and it's funny because it takes a little bit of prodding, because usually, interestingly enough, the first answer, and let me just give some proper context here, a lot of times when I'm working with a company, the initial reason is, okay, well, our sales and marketing team are, they're going and they're pitching our products to potential customers, but they're just so product heavy, and they're just telling all about our product features, and it's not going anywhere. And, and we're losing deals on pricing or whatever. So when I ask that question about vision, hey, what's your vision? Interestingly enough, the majority of times I'll get an initial response where they'll say, oh, well, our vision is to provide customers with a best-in-class, enterprise software to solve X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay, you just explained what your product is. It's not what I asked, though. I asked about your vision. And then they'll give like one or two more similar responses. And I'm like, okay, so do you see how there might be an issue here where I keep asking you about vision and you keep telling me about product, and you're telling me at the same time your team is out there talking all about product? Do you see how that could be an issue if you're unable to articulate your vision? And there's kind of this like, oh, crap kind of moment in their head. So we got to work to extract that vision first, which is, again, what is the industry supposed to be through your eyes? And what that does when we capture that is what we're capturing is point of view. And now you're able to go into rooms as a leader. You're also able to disseminate to your team, what is our company's point of view? What is our company's point of view on the way things are supposed to be, on the way the industry should be operating, on where the industry can go if it's pushed in the right direction? And the power of that, of having that at the leadership level, is you can talk to your investors about that vision. You can talk to, again, your channel partners about that vision. You can talk to your customers. You can talk to prospects about that. You can talk to your employees about that. And when that is effectively distributed out, now at a day-to-day level, your sales and marketing team, when they're talking to prospective customers and they're leading with point of view, now you've set the terms for a totally different conversation. Because now, and especially because so many of these companies struggle with differentiation, and then they think their differentiator is the fact that they have some AI powered whatever, some specific product feature is what they think is their differentiator, when in reality, in anyone else's mind, it all kind of looks roughly the same. You might get, if you try and win on a product feature, you might get a response. It's like, oh, but so-and-so does that as well, or they do something similar to that. And even if you try and say, well, no, they don't do it like us, that person's mind is like, well, no, what are you talking about? I see that they can do something similar enough. But with point of view, no one shares your point of view, right? No one can say, oh, I also have the same exact point of view as you. So it becomes your true differentiator. The way we see the market, our philosophy that underpins everything that we do as a company, right? No one else can, no other company, no other leader can claim to have that same philosophy, that same point of view. And then not only has it become your true differentiator, but then you start to win over customers, new employees who are being hired, additional stakeholders, et cetera, adding people to the community. You start to win them over on that belief system, as opposed to trying to win them over on a feature or a product or a very tactile thing. And when people buy in, quote unquote, based on point of view, now you're architecting a community, and you're growing the community based on a mode of thinking. So now when people are buying in, what they're saying to themselves is, I know they may not have everything figured out today. Maybe the product isn't perfect today, but we got to get on board their rocket ship, because they see where it's all going, and we got to make sure we're on board for that ride, because they're going to take care of us. And that's how you build champion. You turn customers into champions. You turn investors into champions. You turn employees into champions. All of these people become stewards of the vision at the end of the day, as opposed to just people who are there working for you.
Raj, that's great. And I think about how a vision statement can be a filter for all people, because there's so many distractions in business and in life. But if you have that vision clearly laid out, as you said, and define it, you can point back to it when people start to get off track. You can say, this is our vision. We agreed to this, and this is where we're going. And back to, this is what we promised our investors. This is what the vision they bought into. Let's stay track. And if for some reason the vision needs to change, the whole team's got to come back together and agree on a change. But as far as, when you buy into that vision, now you've bought into, this is how we're going to do things around here. Well, Raj, it has been great. It's time to wrap the podcast today. I appreciate all these gold nuggets you've shared with us. Tell our listeners where they can get in contact with you, how they can find you on social media.
Absolutely. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me at startuphypeman.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/in/Rajiv Nathan, Rajiv. I think it's Rajiv Nathan or something. Just search my name. I'll show up. And then another cool thing I'll put together is, we talked about that Pasa formula. So for anyone who is listening who wants to dive deeper into that, I'll create a guide that kind of just talks about the formula more and gives you some discussion prompts to figure out what that would be for your company. And it should be especially helpful if you were, most likely listening to this while, you probably weren't taking furious notes. You were probably grocery shopping or cooking dinner or breakfast or something like that while listening. So it'll give you some nice follow-up material. So just go to, we'll make the URL startuphypeman.com/build. Go to that site and you'll be able to get a download there of the Pasa guide.
That sounds great, Raj. And thanks for sharing that with the listeners. For the listeners, we'll include that in the show notes, and we'll have Raj's contact information, websites, and all those things there. I appreciate you listening to the podcast today. I want to remind you that we do have an in-person live event. We're going to be socially distanced. It's going to be limited to 20 people. So I want you to check that out over at our events page at buildcs.net. This is an interactive communication workshop called Hear and Be Heard. We're going to do some exercises around active listening, having some compassion around listening, and just overall learning to be a better listener. So check that out. We got a early bird special. Take advantage of that. This event's going to be in Lakeland, Florida on June the 18th. So do me a favor, do that. As well as please go to whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Give us a rating and review. Share this podcast with others. I know Raj is giving out some gold nuggets your friends might like. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. Remember to build yourself and build others.